Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Almost Dropouts podcast. My name is Daivik, and I'm your host. And today I have Kaustav. Kaustav's a mechanical engineering student at the University of Waterloo, and currently he's working at Apple, and previously he's worked at Tesla. But Kaustav, you want to introduce yourself?
For sure. I'm actually in Mechatronics Engineering,
Oh,
but I am one of very few people who decided to actually take the route of specializing in the mechanical side of things and focusing on mechanical design, manufacturing engineering, and manufacturing design. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. Currently working at Apple on the iPad display team as a manufacturing design and quality engineering intern. And previously, I've worked at a ton of automotive car companies such as Toyota, General Motors, and most recently Tesla. So, yeah, it's a little bit about me. And thanks for having me, Davik.
yeah, no worries, man. And I know definitely like I've gotten feedback before that people love how I have mechs on some even mechatronics and stuff like that. Like just non-software people come on because
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of a lot of resources and stuff are dedicated towards software engineering, but not as
sure.
much for the other sides of things. So thank you so much for coming on. I hope we'll have a great conversation.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I think to your point about not having as many resources for mechanical engineering, like internships wise, yeah, I've always found that. And that's why I reached out in the first place because I was like, there's probably a ton of people who are not necessarily trying to go down the software route that still, deserve the same amount of advice regarding like career stuff. So I was like, might as well share some of the struggles that I had and some of the, hard, some of the hurdles that I had to come across, pretty much.
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess, with that, let's talk about, start from the beginning. So, when you were first coming into university, so you got into mechatronics at University of Waterloo, but what was sort of like, what were your thoughts coming in? What was sort of your game plan? And especially for that first co-op, what was like, what did you do to prepare? And what would you give as advice for somebody who's trying to get into their first co-op or get for their first occupation?
For sure. So this is actually a really funny story. So I came in um, when I was originally trying to apply to schools. I really wanted to go to business school. So I was like
Hmm.
super. I got accepted to Ivy and Queens and all that, and I was ready to hit accept. And then my parents were like, "No, no, no! You got into engineering at Waterloo. You have to do engineering." I'm like, "Okay." And I had applied to mechatronics engineering just because it sounded cool. I had some idea that it was about robots, but I actually had not done too much research on my actual program of choice, which in hindsight may have not been the best decision to make, but it is something that happened. And, I'm grateful that I'm, still in the program and all that. So, and first co op, that was definitely a big hurdle to cross because you come in from high school, you're king of the hill in grade 12, effectively. We all had,
Yeah.
and you're surrounded by all of these amazing people, most of whom some have like experience. Sorry, let me turn off my notification.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. But sorry. Basically, yeah. So came into first year having that mindset of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get a job super easily. And since I'm in fourth stream, job within the first 4 months of
Yeah.
school starting. So that was definitely like that was an experience because you're looking at all these jobs and you're applying to them and you don't have much context as to what the requirements are, especially when you're someone like me who was non-technical in high school. I did a lot of like leadership activities and didn't really focus on the technical side of things much, inclusive of like robotics and stuff like that. And a lot of people came into Waterloo having that experience and I didn't. um, so that was where I was definitely lacking as well. So I was just like asking myself, how do I even apply to jobs? So I was just like, all right. So I kind of liked designing stuff in first year. Like I kind of liked AutoCAD, kind of like SolidWorks, whatever. And I went down that route of design.
Hmm.
Any interviews that way whatsoever. And then I'm like, okay, fine. Like find anything related to cars. If you even like it, see if you like it, because I've always been obsessed with cars and I've always wanted to work with cars. Still got no interviews. And then I was actually one of the last people in my class to get employed in first year, simply because of my lack of technical knowledge and technical experience. So
Mhm.
I get to a point where I'm getting interviewed by a paper company for an administrative position, pretty much. And I was like, I'll take it. It doesn't matter. I have some like I've demonstrated leadership skills in the past, whatever. Like, I'll
Yeah.
take the job. It's a job. It's better than nothing. And I didn't get that job either. After the interview, I was like absolutely destroyed because
Right.
I was told that, yeah, sorry, like you're a great person, but like it's just not gonna work. Uh,
Mhm.
and then at this point, I think we were approaching the end of exams. And for like perspective, to those who are not familiar with the Waterloo process, there's obviously you have your first round of jobs, you have your second round of jobs, and then afterwards, employers just reach out to you directly. So I was in that batch of like, you no longer can really apply to jobs. There's not much left. Employers are just reaching out directly. And then by chance, I got hired as a junior manufacturing engineering co-op at this company called Magna International. They're an
Mhm.
automotive parts company, and I was like, "Wow!" Somehow this ended up working out. So, in hindsight, I think the advice I'd like to give people is that if you're applying to engineering at Waterloo, especially now that like there's so many facilities for like learning how to code and like going to maker spaces and things like that, get some exposure during your
Mhm.
last summer before university. Get some technical experience, get some exposure, and kind of get some insight into what your program is basically going to make you do for the next 5 years. And do your research, unlike myself.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's no, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think, one of the things I really resonate with is I think half the battle of the first co-op isn't like, of course, they're just getting the job as well, but it's also staying determined and not getting, uh, you know, discouraged.
100%
And I know it's,
giving up.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry, I was just
Yeah.
bouncing that idea of like not giving up and like being resilient through it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a perfect word right there. Like being just like not being like, yeah, not kicking. I think with it as well, it's like, even if you got perhaps that job at the paper company and everything, I think a lot of people also, with that first co-op, you have such lofty expectations sometimes that, when it doesn't pan out, which in hindsight, especially when I'm looking back, like, your first co-op, you really don't like your employer is taking a chance on you. So at the end of the day, you get any working experience that's good. And I think what's really important with that too is that even if things don't necessarily pan out to your lofty expectations or in the direction you want, there's still something you can do to improve your career, to help you get to a point where you do get the companies or do get the jobs that you want to work at. Um, and so I think, coming back to the resiliency point of view, that's part of it, right? Like
Yeah.
staying resilient and not letting one co-op necessarily decide your whole university career or your career in general is really important.
And I think like for like a lot of the first years who might be listening, it's like if you need to take a co-op for free and do one with a student design team, I think that is probably one of the most like underrated co-op experiences that you could have. Simply because,
Hmm.
yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest messages that someone who graduated around like 4 or 5 years ago, he gave me a message that like money during co-op does not necessarily matter. Like you could be getting paid $50 an hour, whatever it is, right? And you could hate your job, and you could come out of that experience not having much to write about on your resume. Whereas
Hmm.
in comparison, if you work at say a student design team, yeah, sure, you're working for free, but at the core of it, the amount of learning and the amount of experience and exposure you get through that like 4 month period where you're dedicating yourself to like building an electric race car or building a solar car from scratch, that kind of experience is invaluable almost, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, no, 100%. I think you addressed it pretty well there. Like money is part of a job, of course, but I think especially for those first few co-ops,
Yeah,
like the biggest consideration should be the best opportunity you have to gain experience, and the
for
money will sort of follow later on in future co-ops, and you can have more of a choice there. But I think especially at the beginning, it's all about furthering your resume, having a ground to step on, like stand on, and honestly, just trying to make somebody or trying to convince somebody to take a chance on you.
yeah,
That's really important.
yeah, and to that point, like, how do you can I think the next question that maybe some people might have is that like how do you convince someone to like take that chance on you? And it's just by being personable and like showing that level of willingness to like learn and adapt, and also like having like an open-minded attitude, and having that like a having a persevering attitude, and also like genuinely working on those soft skills, like being able to talk, like being able to answer simple questions in interviews and articulate yourself properly. That's like a skill that in and of itself will want someone to take a chance on you, because a lot of these technical skills, some jobs will just expect you to learn them on the job. But if you can show them that you have, but like a lot of these soft skills cannot be taught, because they're a lot of them are character traits. um,
Mhm.
so it's like also big to like focus on those areas as well, especially if you're someone that doesn't necessarily like talking to people a lot, or like can't articulate themselves that well. It's something that's definitely worth working on even before entering university.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, so to transition a little bit, so you get this first co-op at Magna, and you've done co-ops in the future now, like you've done more co-ops, of course, after that as well. So now that you've done these internships, what would you say, like, what do you think students should do in order to get the most out of their internships? What are your perspective? What's your perspective on that?
For sure, yeah. I think it depends on the company, obviously, but it also depends on like your personal drive and your personal like ability to kind of adapt to different situations. Like if you go into an internship, say, and like it doesn't meet your expectations, that's not like a situation where you should give up. You should definitely consider like my biggest thing has always been asking questions and asking for different types of work that I might be more interested in at a co-op, and somehow it still it finds its way to me, because like if you show your mentor and you show your manager that like you're willing to go the distance to do whatever it is, and you kind of give your mentor and manager kind of like your set goals for yourself out of this co-op. Like set goals for yourself for every internship you do, pretty much. Like what do you want to turn this into? Do you want to turn this into a full-time job? Do you want to use this as like another stepping stone for your career? Do you want to build a specific type of experience? For example, in your case, like you want to build better product management and program management experience, and how do you want your manager or mentor to help facilitate that? Because at the end of the day, like your manager and your mentor are both facilitators for your own success. And if you don't ask them questions and you don't interact with them, and you don't have that like willingness to kind of adapt and ask those questions, it's definitely a harder. You make it harder on yourself to actually get something out of an internship.
And I think what's really important, like one thing I always, when I'm in coffee chat and stuff, at least this is my own personal perspective, and you can feel free to disagree or agree with me here, but it's sort of what you touched on upon as well, is that, make sure that you're sort of, you can feel free to define what your internship will be like. And
Hmm.
what I'm saying, what I mean by that is like, for example, when I realized I want to do product management, it was hard for me to get out of the cycle of software engineering because of course, like, you have a bunch of software engineering internship experience,
Yeah.
and most likely you're probably going to get another software engineering job. And
Yeah.
so what ended up happening for me is I got a software engineering job again, but on the first day, I realized I want to do product management, and I made that very clear to the project manager at the time that, hey, I know I was hired as a software engineer, but if I could also take on some product management work, that'd be great. And the one thing he told me was, yeah, as long as you can finish the software engineering work too, I'd be more than happy to throw you some like product work as well. And I think, with that, what was really important with that experience is that, you know, a lot of times we sort of we shy away
Hmm.
from getting what we want from a
Yeah.
position, from an internship, but a company wants to provide whatever you want from that internship. And so un, like, unless they really believe that the job that you're hired for is going to take up all your time and you can't help in any other way, at the end of the day, a company will most likely not say no to you doing free work for them and helping them out. So
Yeah.
make sure you're defining those internships. Sorry, go ahead.
And I wholeheartedly like agree with that. I remember when I was when I was working at Tesla last term, I really wanted less like manufacturing work and installation work, and I wanted more design work. and I wanted more like analysis work, and I wanted more experience with like those types of principles, because eventually I wanted to get into like designing like manufacturing processes and stuff like that. So, my team didn't really do much of that. My team actually did no real design work for the most part. So what happened was is that one of my friends, a fellow intern, basically reached out and said that one of the full time she knew on one of the design teams needed some extra help. So I reached out to this guy. I got my approval from my manager to manage, both of these teams' work, and that's how I managed my design work and built my design portfolio up even more.
Mhm.
So yeah, 100% agree with the fact that like you don't necessarily have to dig yourself into a hole with your internships. You can
Mhm.
you and define it as like a singular um, and sorry, define it in one singular way. You can definitely wear multiple hats, because at the end of the day, like when you're working full time, I've seen this, like you do have to kind of be able to, especially when you're in a field like product management, you have to be able to wear those multiple hats,
Yeah.
and you have to transition between them seamlessly, and you can do that through your internship and facilitate those opportunities for yourself if you're just willing to go out and ask for it, I think, a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I think that's really key what you just said at the end there. Like you just have to go out and ask for it. Like,
Yeah,
and I think that's like even if they say no, at the end of the day,
still
what
ask.
is
Sorry, did it cut out there?
sorry, what were you saying?
I was just saying you still went out and like it's not going to harm you in any way, at the core of it, right? As you were saying.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it's really important just to go ask and try your hand. Like and if not, like okay, it's fine. It is what it is. And sort of to transition there, another thing I think a lot of people ask me is what if I know I think I want to try this out, but I don't want to like feel behind or I don't want to get caught behind everyone else because they already sort of know what they want to do. And I'll answer my perspective on it, but what's your perspective on that? Like, do you think that it's really important to have a focus throughout your co-ops, or do you think it's the time to experiment and try different things out?
I think it's like it can go either way. I've had friends who have had immense success with exploring different types of fields and doing different types of things during their internships. I definitely think that like um, companies respect that sometimes in terms of like, and at the core of it, like you kind of use these like years, like these 5 years are for experimentation, right? We have no like real responsibilities holding us back. We have like, and real life hasn't exactly started yet. And at the end of the day, like university's all about like finding your passion. So if you do one type of job and you hate it, don't simply keep on doing it because like, oh, I'll get, a better company next time or something like that. you know it, if you go, a lot of times I've seen like, someone goes one step back, so to speak, um, but then they go two steps forward, like doing what they actually love. And I think that like there's no rush. People are too
Hmm.
obsessed with like the rush of like figuring out what they want to do and like trying to force themselves into something. And
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's like we're only 23 after we graduate, 23 to 24 max. So you have the rest of your life to kind of figure it out too. So right now is a good time to experiment, pretty much, especially on your first couple of co-ops. Like the more diversity of experience sometimes you have, especially I think with mechanical work, a lot of the times, if you have like a bit of product design experience and a bit of manufacturing experience and a bit of research experience, that could all tie in well to like a sick co op later on
Yeah.
because you can tie them all together into a singular role effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And I think actually, so I'm sort of also on the boat where if you know what you want to do, then yeah, that's fair enough. Like go do that. But if there's something you think you might want to pursue, like my logic's always been that yeah, like of course research about the position, don't just jump into it blindly, but at the same time, if it's something you want to try out, then by all means do it. Like for
Yeah.
myself, I think if I stuck to what I did in my first internship, I would have been doing front end engineering,
Yeah.
which now I know I do not like front end.
Yeah. And some people
So
do, and there's no
so
like problem, right? Like that's the other thing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and that's what the internships are for. Like after 4 months, the expectation is that you're done the job. So even if you don't necessarily like it, you can still get a good experience out of it. Like you said, might tie in really well later on. And after 4 months, it's over. Like you get to go back to whatever you want to try out or try a new thing out. Like I think it's really important right now. It's like the sacrifice you're making right now is a lot less compared to later on in your career.
and
So like,
exactly, like you have a 4-month commitment. In the future, if like after we graduate and start working full time, if anyone sees you're just jumping around every 6 7 months, even a year, if you only stick around at a company for a year, that'll raise some red flags for an employer.
mhm,
You
yeah,
know, like, and you better have a good reason for doing it, because otherwise it's like, why can't you stay committed? Whereas right now we are literally under the smallest contractual obligation of only 4 months, if you really
yeah,
look at the grand scheme of things. Like, four
yeah,
months in a company is nothing, effectively. And but you still can learn so much during that time about yourself and about what you actually like doing. So
mhm,
my advice has always been, try it out if you actually want to see if you like it. If you've done it in your spare time and you're like iffy about it, still try it, because it could lead to something even better in the future. If you hate it, there's
mhm,
no regrets about it, because it was only 4 months of your life.
mhm. Yeah, no, 100%. And okay, I'm gonna transition a little bit,
Sure.
so into more tangible type of things for people.
Hmm.
And so, you've done great co-ops, you worked at Tesla, you're now working at Apple, so it's a very straightforward question. What, like, as a mechatronics student who's doing design, what do you think you did for your own portfolio, resume, etc., that helped you stand out as a candidate?
Hmm.
And what advice would you have for people trying to vie for these jobs?
For sure. So, in terms of my portfolio, I had a couple of side projects, and I also had a ton of like what I was telling you about before, where I would ask for design work consistently um, during my internships. And I kind of built my portfolio around that as well. So the term before I got Tesla, I worked at a company. Sorry, I worked at Toyota. So I had the opportunity to actually see like a whole product, like not a whole product life cycle, but various phases of it. And I
Mhm,
kind of also taught myself like the Toyota production system, which Tesla is trying to emulate. And I knew that
mhm,
going in. So I was like, how can I sell myself that I know Toyota's production system well enough that I can um, basically adapt to it and actually apply that during an interview with Tesla or something like
right.
that.
Mhm,
And that's mainly what I was focusing on. Is just because, and I did my research beforehand. Is what do Tesla recruiters look for? A lot of the times they just look for experiences that you've had in the automotive industry, or for example, if you have a strong portfolio. And that's my biggest piece of advice to prospective mechanical designers or manufacturing engineers, is build that portfolio, because now I don't really get asked too many questions on my resume. It's mainly
mhm,
questions about my portfolio, and
mhm,
a lot of people will just do mindless side projects, and I think those are important too. Like, do something you're interested in and build it, and you can learn so much more from it rather than just learning stuff online and taking courses online. A lot of people will take like I remember I did this myself. I took a thermodynamics course from Udemy, like online, and I hated it. And then I realized that this, like no one's really gonna care that know this random thermodynamics course. Like, the actual reality is you can, like, especially in the mechanical field, it's like understanding materials fundamentals. They'll only ask you a few questions, and how you can also think on the spot and have a design process on the spot, and kind of guide your interviewer through how you design something. So focus on those fundamentals, like, why would you use a certain material versus another? Why would you
right.
use a certain manufacturing process on a specific material? And also, a big thing that one of my friends told me was that focus on how things are made, because that's the one thing that like I've literally been given a part at interviews and been told like, hey, how do you make this? How do you think it's made?
Mhm,
Like, what kind of manufacturing process would you use in order to construct this thing? So yeah, that's kind of like my advice on like people who want to get employed by companies like Tesla. that just like focus on those fundamentals, because without those you will trip up on that interview. And focus on like guiding your, not always having the right answer. Like it's not, at the end of the day, don't go around memorizing a textbook. Like
Yeah.
focus on applying that knowledge in a way that you can guide yourself through solving a problem, because that's what they care about most. It's like,
Yeah.
because a lot of the times, especially a company like Tesla, like a lot of things are messy and still, getting figured out and still are in the process. So how do you actually go about putting out a fire if you are tasked with putting one out? That's what
Yeah.
they care about. How quickly do you think on your feet effectively?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think one actually, so sort of relating to that, and it's funny the parallels between mechanical engineering and software engineering in this regard, or just
Yeah,
the company interview process is that one of the things I had a friend who was doing the Google interview, and for software engineering, and one of the biggest advices I gave him was that make sure that you're explaining your thought process throughout the interview,
for sure.
because it's not necessarily just about getting the right answer for these companies. It's
Yeah,
also about how do you approach it. And you know, even if you get the right answer, that's good. That's great to hear. But you got the right answer for that specific question. That doesn't necessarily mean you had the right process of going through it, or or you had you had the process that a company would want to see you take. It's just you in that situation you might have got it right. So if you explain your process behind it, it leaves that, it takes away that doubt or that room for doubt that these companies have
yeah,
during the interview, because they know exactly what your process is, how you think about things. And even if you don't get it right, as long as you're thinking in the right direction, and you would have eventually gotten to the answer if you just were led a little more towards it, or you had more resources, then sometimes you can still do well in those interviews even if you don't get the right answer.
yeah. And I think that people also get flustered really quickly when they don't know the answer like immediately. Like take your time, you know, and also like think out loud. I think that's one of my friends gave me that advice, is like continuously think out loud, because
Hmm.
that'll definitely, again, that'll articulate to your interviewer that like, okay, this is the, you're thinking about the right things. I think that's what they care the most about, is like, are you on the correct path? Because in your head you could be like on, you probably know the answer a lot of the times if you've done your homework or whatever and done the research about the job. um, but like the more you articulate yourself and articulate each and every thought you have, the more the interviewer is going to be able to see that you're on the right track. And sometimes they might just stop and be like, yeah, like you're close enough, like let's move
Yeah.
forward.
Hmm. Yeah, and sort of going back to one of the things you said earlier as well with the design portfolio thing. Now, granted, I'm not in mechanical engineering and I don't have a design portfolio because of that, but definitely like my friends who are in mechanical engineering or in mechatronics who have gotten really good mechanical co-ops and internships. One of the common themes I've seen throughout is that design portfolio, because it gives, and of course, like I'm assuming here, but I'm assuming that it gives the interview actual tangible things to look at and see that yes, you actually did this.
Yeah,
It's not just text on a resume.
yeah. And for us, like especially with something like design, it's purely based on visuals, right? Like a lot of the time,
Mhm.
like if you just say, oh, I made a fixture, like great, like good for you. At the end of the day, that's what I as an employer would think. Like, oh, I literally everyone on this interview list has made a fixture. But like if you
Mhm.
show me that, like, oh, like, the way I kind of structure my design portfolio is I have a couple of pictures, different views of whatever it is that I made, and then below it I will say like, oh, what's the intended problem it's solving? What process
Right.
I go on in order to make sure that this was easily manufacturable? What budget constraints did I have? And overall, like a lot of the times, so I'll start with a drawing, like actual hand drawing. I'm pretty old fashioned that way, and then I'll translate that to CAD, and then from there actually get it machined. So articulating that process can't necessarily be done just through words. You have to do those through pictures.
Mhm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
also important. It's like you've already shown the interviewer that you know what the design process is like, and you've given them an idea of like what things you consider when you're actually designing something.
Right. Yeah. No, that's. Thank you so much for sharing that, and that's great to hear. I hope that was good insights for anybody who's in mechanical engineering, or even if you're not, there's definitely like showing that thought process. I think is pertinent towards every interview.
Yeah,
Um,
It's there's a lot of transferable skills at the end of the day
Hmm.
between
Exactly.
fields.
Yeah, and sort of on like a little bit of tangent here, but I think in general, like engineering, like regardless of the tools you use to solve your problems, engineering at the end of the day is one of the same, where you're just using different tools in the physical world to solve different problems. And so
Exactly.
whether that be design or that be, Newtonian physics or be coding, etc., at the end of
Yeah,
the day, it's about
if you're
solving
in a
problems.
lab, like you're at the end of the day, you're still like solving a problem. You've still got like you still start out with a need statement in all of
Mhm,
those situations, right?
mhm. And I think half the battle in engineering is not only like learning the content and the knowledge, it's about learning how to solve problems and that process.
Yeah.
And I think really our degrees become valuable, not like it's valuable, of course, because of the knowledge we gain throughout the way, but it's also valuable because we learn the way we should be approaching problems and how to break it down into different components.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Like it's like and that kind of experience definitely stems from like just practical experience and like, you if you're given a problem, initially it looks like super daunting, but like I think the main goal is always like how do you break that problem down, right? In an easy way. Um, in order to create a solution from it. Because it could be the simplest problem, but coming up with a solution, you have to be able to show that, like, you know, um, that that thought process, or asking yourself those questions, like, why am I doing this? I think that's probably the biggest thing I got from my first internship was like, you should always ask, like, why am I doing this? And then from there, you'll be able to like, kind of carve your own path to a solution more easily.
mhm. Yeah. Okay, so let's transition now.
For
We talked sort of talked about what you could do for your resume and interviews and engineering in general. So now let's talk specifically about Tesla. And so well, let's start off there. So you know, talk about specific tips for Tesla, like to get the job or things that Tesla is looking for and how people can maximize their opportunities to get into Tesla and just in general, like your thoughts on the company, company culture, etc.
Yeah. So the way I would recommend you reach out is obviously reach out to a recruiter, or like, for example, it took me like 10 recruiters. I reached out like 10, 15 times and I got one bite. And that was when I was like, yes, finally, like that's all it took. But when you actually reach out to the recruiter, even in like you consider like specifics in terms of like your email header, like have a job ID associated with it, like job ID, vehicle engineering internship, or something like that. And then from there, the recruiter will be able to see exactly what job you want and be more liable to open your email and check out your resume. And another recommendation I have is like link your design portfolio directly to your resume for all of the like mechanical people out there, because I personally experienced this where my interviewers did not have my design portfolio on them simply because the recruiter only sent them my resume. Even though I sent both documents. So have those two like very crucial documents linked together in one file.
Hmm.
That's the first thing they see. The first thing they see is always my design portfolio, and then my resume comes at the end. Just because I'd like to give my interviewers a visual perspective on what I'm doing before, like, they get into the written aspect of it through my resume. So reach out to the recruiters, and also in the emails you reach out, keep it short, keep it succinct, and say, like, what I usually say is that I'm looking for this internship for this time frame. Here are some experiences that differentiate me from other candidates. So, for example, I used a lot of my automotive industry experience because I'd worked at General Motors, Magna, and Toyota prior to working at Tesla. And I kind of highlighted some of the projects that I did there, that they might find attractive. For example, I worked on the 2019 RAV4 when I was working at Toyota, and I had all of that experience from there. So, and then also illustrate what kind of roles you'd be open to. Say, like, for example, I said that I was open to both manufacturing engineering, manufacturing design, as well as product design roles, pretty much. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, those kind of specifics definitely help the recruiter narrow you down from a massive, like, at the end of the day, they get thousands of emails a day. How
Yeah.
how do you stand out in a thousand, effectively?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think sort of in the same boat here where I think definitely reaching out to recruiters is the best way to get into of course we have like online job postings too, but
Hmm.
if you can get your resume in front of a recruiter, it definitely goes a long way.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, same. I think you addressed a lot of the big points that I had. I think the only one I would add, and you might have addressed this too, but talk about how you're like in your resume. I think it's really important to look at the job description of if
yeah,
you have a job description, and talk about how you can sort of plug and play from day one. And what I mean by that is like, especially at Tesla, there's a lot more work than people, and because of that, there's not as much time for mentorship and stuff. Like, of course, it's there, but I'm saying they're a lot more focused on people who can come in and start doing the work from day one,
under,
and sort that can sort of ramp up really quickly. And so, if you can show that your previous experience and projects or whatever can allow you to do that, I think that goes a long way, especially at a company like Tesla. But
yeah,
what do you think about that?
and exactly, like highlight those experiences. Like if it says designing fixtures in the job posting, have it written somewhere. You know, like have that written. I designed a fixture to accomplish this. It's a lot of the times what I see on LinkedIn and on people's resumes, they just say like, this is one of the pieces of advice I got from my mentor at Tesla was that you know if you just say, "Oh, I used, X software, like I used SolidWorks to design this." Okay, good for you. Like you did that. But what does that design actually achieve? Like did you uh reduce your cycle time of a specific station by like 10%? Or did it have some kind of instrumental role to play in one of Tesla's new products or Toyota's new products or whatever, like always show
Hmm.
impact, I think, in your resume through the projects you've done, and have
Hmm.
as much as you can quantitative data,
Yep.
as opposed to just qualitative points about your resume and projects.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, no, I'm 100% on the. I think numbers are really important to throw in there. And sometimes you have to get creative with it. I'm
yeah,
not saying lie, but I'm saying like you have to sometimes find ways to like quantify it, and it might take a bit to actually sit down and think about it, but I've always found some way of doing it. And so definitely like just if you think from a recruiter's perspective or hiring manager's perspective, like just having a number there makes it a lot more easier to actually see the impact or think about the impact you had
yeah.
rather than just sort of being open-ended, like an open-ended statement.
And that can always also go in like the totally wrong direction. I don't know if like you you've probably seen this too, where it's like I've one time seen that, oh, I ramped up production, I sped up production by a whole year. I'm like, that makes zero sense. You- A car's releasing in 2019. How did you make such an impact that it's moved up by a whole year? That doesn't seem logical. So like stay within reason.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's what I'm saying. Don't lie or don't exaggerate,
don't exaggerate. Yeah, exactly.
but you can still find a way to find a metric for it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes, and actually, this is one of the going back to one of the earlier topics we talked about. One thing to sort of get most of your internship to is, I would say, like from the beginning, start finding those metrics you can throw later on. And I'm not saying like obviously focus on the job, don't just think about the next job, but I'm saying in your resume it becomes a lot easier then if you have some metrics and stuff you've been taking into account throughout your internship,
Yeah.
to sort of see the effect that you've had and help the tangible effort that you made.
And
So
always ask your mentor, I think, or your manager to, give a quick glance at your
yeah,
resume before you leave. Because, like, yeah, sure, like, they will be the people who tear it apart in a way that makes you, like, that benefits you in the future. Like, it's
yeah,
definitely, and they will scrutinize every point you make at the end of the day,
yep,
because that was their job while you were there. And they'll be able to obviously facilitate opportunities for you for the future that way. Like if you want to quantify something, there is always a way. And the two best people to ask are your mentor, your coworkers and your manager about that kind of stuff, because they've been through it at the end of the day.
yep. No, and actually, it's funny because when you're talking about the scrutinizing every point and like sort of ripping your resume apart, it's sort of analogous to first year as well, where you come in like I think, and if you're in first year, like, I'm not trying to be mean, but it's
Oh,
just the truth. Like,
no.
all of us went through this, but your resume sucks.
Yeah, like I had a like for funny story about that one actually. My resume was I thought I was so important that I had
Yeah.
2 pages on Word, like full
Oh, no. 2 pages for your first resume,
2
man?
pages on my resume. I thought I was that important. I was like
Yeah.
I was like I look back on them like, oh man, like, and this is again, I'm not trying to be mean to anyone here, like, but at the core of it, if you have 2 pages for your resume and you're in first year, like, stop right there. That's the first mistake.
That's a no-no right there, yeah.
If you have paragraphs of information about, running your school leadership committee, like, I'm sorry, employers really don't care about that anymore.
Yeah.
And I learned that the hard way, personally. So definitely, I'm just trying to, be as helpful as possible by saying what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, no, exactly, man. Like, honestly, the biggest advice to give to first years is just get ready for your resume to get torn apart. Know it's part of the process, but it's good. Like, that's how you get to a level where you understand how your resume can become a lot better and how you can get better jobs. Because, talking about, having a page dedicated on your robotics club might be nice. You might think it's really important, but,
And your friends
when,
might think it's great. Like,
yeah.
like, do not go around asking your friends to look at your resume also a lot of the time. Like in first year, it's kind of like the blind guiding the blind sometimes. I've seen. Ask anyone else. Ask someone who is a third party who kind of will give you that honest advice that your friend may not necessarily give you a lot of it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, no, I'll go one step further. Ask everybody about your resume, which means like,
people email it to people, LinkedIn message it to people. Like, it's not gonna hurt you.
yeah,
If they say it sucks on if I think what's it called? Waterloo does this thing where you can put your resume on Reddit or something. Like,
yeah, yeah,
right? And it gets torn apart. Like, that's some people might think that's going too far, the way people, roast each other on Reddit. But that's like the most, I think, character building activity you can get.
yeah.
Getting your resume torn apart that hard, it'll just build the character for the future. And we're still learning too. Like, I'm not claiming to be the most excellent resume writer ever. Like, you can always make it better. Like, when I try and make a new rev of my resume, it takes like 4 or 5 times before you actually get something tangible out of it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's pretty funny you mentioned that because it pretty much becomes like r/roast me in
Yeah,
Waterloo subreddit.
the game over. Like, they will come after you in ways you didn't think was possible, man. Like,
Yeah, like,
they will
but
attack.
it's good. Sorry.
You know, it's character building. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, no, and I think it's definitely required, especially in first year, because if you don't get anybody else to rip it apart, the employer is gonna rip it apart. So,
Yeah,
like, what would you rather prefer, randos or employers?
their version of ripping it apart equals you not getting selected. Like,
Exactly.
that's it. So you would rather go through that, like, initial rejection beforehand. You know, like, even after I'd worked at Tesla, like, I think the term when I was applying for jobs, the most recent term we've had to apply for jobs, I went through 4 or 5 revisions of my resume and design portfolio, and I had to scrap it so many times, and it was so frustrating. But I'm like grateful I did it regardless. So like, your resume is a work in progress. I think that's what I'm gonna try and end it off with in terms of like
Hmm.
what I
Yeah,
think.
100% with you on that. And so, yeah, okay. Let's transition now again. So we talked about Tesla, some of the stuff you can do to get into Tesla, what you did, and how you sort of catered your experience. So let's move on to your latest position at Apple. So, since you've already talked about some of your previous stuff, let's maybe contrast the two companies between what they're looking for, between what Tesla was looking for and what Apple's looking for, and maybe some more tips just in general of how you better your portfolio and resume to get you that job.
Yeah. So I focused on when I was applying for like this term. I was focused on how do I land like a good design job and a job that like gives me more insight towards product design specifically. And even though the role I'm currently doing in at Apple isn't like product related, I'm still getting a lot of exposure to the design teams and still learning a lot about different types of manufacturing methods and getting a lot of exposure that way. So the way I kind of
Mhm.
went about it initially was like, I did cater certain points of my resume towards what Apple was looking for simply in their job posting. Like they said, we're looking for people who've had experience with engineering validation testing. I was like, I did it at multiple companies. So I wrote a point about that on two of my job experiences. And then I also wrote, they said high volume automotive manufacturing. All of the companies that I worked at mostly had been related to high volume automotive manufacturing. So that's how I catered my resume towards them. And at the end of the day, Apple is like I'm a cog in a massive machine. Like they get hundreds of applicants, and like part of it was luck that I got selected for an interview because like a lot of the times you just don't. So I think the way in which it worked differently for me this time was that I took words directly from their posting and then I highlighted them on my resume because I'm like, what if they do what Google does and go through looking for specific words on like some kind of text editor or something like that. So I did that and it ended up working out. And even with the interview process, it was a lot of it, like it was 50% technical, 50% non technical. My first interview that I had was wholly technical, and it was, usually you're given like a part and you're asked to make that, and I wasn't. This time I got drawn a random manufacturing process, and then I was asked how I would improve it. And that
Mhm.
kind of like, and as soon as I got that question, I was like, I don't know. Like I literally had no idea. But
Yeah.
what I did was, as you were talking about before, was I just walked them through what I would do if I was presented with that problem at work. Like if I
Mhm.
went down to my manufacturing line and I saw that like, oh, this thing isn't working, how would I go about solving that problem? And I think
Right.
that's and I didn't think I did that great. But I did enough to like get to the next stage of interviews, luckily. So yeah, it's definitely like I don't, and I personally do not pride myself on being the most technically skilled person like in the world. I'm definitely not. All of my friends
Mhm.
are way more technically skilled than I am. But what I do like pride myself on is like my ability to articulate myself a lot of the time and
Right.
think out loud. And I think that's what a lot of employers care about, like focus on being concise, focus on being able to talk to people and be personable, because a lot of the
Mhm.
times, like, you might be the most gifted person technically, but to move ahead, you do need to get people to like you. And if
Yep.
you can bring that to the table, I think that's like almost as just as valuable.
Yeah, for sure. And people always like one of the biggest things in the interview or just in general is people always want to work with people that they want to work with.
And
And
people
so if
like,
they're choosing a candidate, they want somebody they want to work with.
man, like they all, and another thing on that point is like, on my Apple interview, I got asked like, "Oh, do you know this software?" I straight up said no. I was like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
genuinely did not know what like jump and Minitab was. I was like, I've never used them before, but like, and I didn't have them written on my resume, so don't lie. Like
Yeah.
if they ask you, like, honesty goes a long way. You know, um,
And you know what's probably gonna happen? Like if you did say yes, they probably ask you a follow-up question and look a lot worse because now they know you lied.
yeah, exactly. Like you never want to be caught in the middle of a lie during an interview.
Yeah.
Like that is the worst. Like if you say you don't know, then they'll be like, all right, I appreciate that. And like even during my Tesla interview, like I got asked like a random GD&T question, and GD&T for perspective is like geometric dimensioning and tolerancing.
Okay.
Had no idea like what the answer was, and I said, I'm like, I'm not that skilled with it, like sorry. And he was like, yeah, I appreciate it, man. Like, thanks for letting me know. And then he asked me
Yeah.
another question. I could answer that. So a lot of the times, it's the best thing if you are honest with your interviewer.
Yeah. No, exactly. 100% with that, man. So,
Don't try and fake
yeah.
it during the interview. Big thing.
Yeah, don't try. I've seen that where like, I I've heard about at least I've heard of people doing that where they say like and of course I'm coming from a software perspective, but some people ask like, okay, do you know Python? And they'll just say yes. And then the moment they ask any syntax question from Python or like something pretty easy questions, they have no idea. And now the whole interview is pretty much gone because the interviewer knows you just lied.
To like, because at the end of the day, you can't. A lot of the times, people think they can BS an interviewer. Like they are at the position they are for a reason.
Yeah.
You Like
Yeah.
they gotta like also people undermine like how much harder it is to get a full-time job at some of these companies as opposed to getting an internship, you know? Like and these people have gone through that process and they use this technology every day that they're asking you about in the interview. So if you
Yep.
think you might know better than them when they ask you, "Hey, do you know how to make a Python script?" like and you say yes, they will ask you follow-up questions with it because they just want to test your knowledge, you know?
Yep. No, exact 100%, man. I 100% resonate with that. And I think being honest is definitely like very underrated, but very you should do it or else you might screw up the whole interview type of thing.
Yeah, and like learning 5 million concepts the night before an interview and expecting like sorry, what's it called? Like having those kinds of sorry, doing all this last minute studying and just being like, all right, like this will work. It'll definitely like, you know, come to bite you in the back later on.
Yeah, for sure, man. Cool. Yo, thank you so much for coming on. Is there any last thing you want to talk about or anything else you want to bring up?
For sure. I think like my final message to, everyone listening would just be like, don't get caught up in um chasing like specific dream jobs and like beating yourself up over it if you don't necessarily get them. Like these 5 years don't define you. Um,
Mhm.
I, and I definitely struggled with that a lot. And I would like my earnest advice would just be like, at the core of it, being yourself goes a long way. Especially like in an interview or in you know um, while applying to jobs and stuff like that. And having like that humbleness and like being able to kind of resonate with that goes a long way as well. So just, there's a lot of times, like, especially at Waterloo, people get sucked into the idea that, like, if I don't go to California, I'm not like worth anything. I think
Yep.
that idea is something that it's ruined a lot of people's lives. Uh,
Yep.
and like, don't think that like don't don't go to California just for the sake of, like if you have a genuine passion towards like wanting to work at a company in California and you show that to the interviewer, you will get a job, you know? And it might not be the job, but you'll still have shown that you're passionate about something. So I think that like instead of chasing the idea of California, chase the idea of a passion. Like my passion was cars and it's always been cars, you know?
Right.
So I was like, I genuinely want to work at Tesla because they're obviously, what is it, accelerating the world's transition to renewable energy.
Mhm.
Like they're revolutionizing the way we see personal transportation, you know? So
Mhm.
because of that, that's what I think was my passion. And I
Mhm.
defined that very clearly, like a year or two before I even applied. So that's how I think I personally got the job. And that's kind of what I would suggest that people do as well, like find your passion, be it in software engineering, be it in mechanical design, whatever it is. So yeah, that's kind of the idea that I wanted to leave people off with. And thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no worries, man. And definitely, like, thank you so much for coming on. That was great. Final note there. I don't think I really have much to add because I think you covered a lot of it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I would definitely love to have you on sometime, like in the future as well. But I think this was very valuable, especially for people looking for design internships,
For sure.
mechanical design internships. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much.
If people want to message me like on LinkedIn or whatever or Instagram DM, like, I'm always down to meet new people and just like, help you guys out. So feel
Mhm.
free to message me on whatever social media platform you deem best.
Yeah, and I'll leave all your socials in the links below. So hopefully people can see that. And but yeah, thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for coming on. And until next one, guys, take care and peace.
Thank you, man.